Thank you all for having me. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me all right. Like Lindy just said, my name is David, and my presentation title has way too many instances of the word teach, but it's teaching how to teach the Library Teaching Institute. Thanks you all for joining today. Hopefully we'll get a chance to dig into some cool stuff in this, our last session of the day. So before I launch into the bulk of my presentation, I'm going to start this off with a land acknowledgement. So today I'm presenting to you from Northern Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C., which is the lands of the Piscataway and Manahoac tribes. And one of my other things I'm working on this year is making sure that my land acknowledgement statements go beyond that sort of performative, name the tribes and then keep it moving. So I'm working with the Conference on Academic Library Management to revamp my approach to land acknowledgements, to move towards action rather than performance. So I'm here today to commit to you that I teach a course on misinformation in the spring. I'm going to be adding more Indigenous authors to my syllabus and adding a theme about false claims to Indigenous ancestry to my syllabus. And I'm also here to encourage you all to consider what it could mean to move beyond acknowledgement into action when you think about land acknowledgements. So if you would like an easy way to move to that action step, I would encourage you to donate to the Indian Land Tenure Foundation. It's a national organization that serves American Indian nations and people in the recovery and control of their rightful homelands. I've got a link. I'm going to put it in the chat. It's in the slide, bit.ly/LIT23 donate. And I should mention the Indian Land Tenure Foundation isn't associated with the conference or with George Mason. It's just an organization where I believe in its mission. And I hope you'll consider donating to the Beyond Land Acknowledgement Fund to start doing some action. And if you'd like to talk more about land acknowledgement, I would love to talk to you more about that after this presentation, which has these learning outcomes. So after this session, I'm hopeful that you'll be able to define core competencies for library instructors in your context, discuss ways to scaffold training for new and returning library instructors, and identify the ways that the Library Teaching Institute or a similar program could be implemented in your context. And we're going to accomplish that with our agenda, in which I will talk through some context and beginnings. Then we'll do an activity surrounding core competencies in library instruction. Then I'll talk your ear off yet again about the Library Teaching Institute. I'll talk about its creation and the structure, what we do at Mason. And then you'll get a chance to reflect and think about your own context, and then we will have some time for questions at the end. Feel free to pop your questions in the chat as we go. I'm going to do my best to monitor the chat as I'm speaking, but I am a one-person ship in this presentation today, so bear with me if I only get to it at the end. So, as I said, I'm the only person presenting today, but this work wasn't done by just me. So you can see up here on the screen that I'm acknowledging some of my colleagues who were instrumental in starting this process with me. So Ashley Blinstrup, Kayla Gourlay, Moya Kirker, Jana Matson, Anna Murphy-Lang, and Megan Reichel were all part of the original conceptualization and planning of this. And the current team for the Library Teaching Institute 2023 is Amanda Bourne and Audrey Richardson. Plus, we have institutional support and buy-in from our participants from our library administration, crucially. So thanks to everyone who was involved in the creation of LTI. I don't want you to think that I did this all by myself, because I certainly could not have done it without everybody on the screen. Preambles aside, let's launch into some context. So George Mason. George Mason is a public R1 university, which means that we're a doctoral granting institution with we're in the highest category of research output. We have 4 locations, 3 in Northern Virginia outside DC, so near Washington, DC in the United States, and then 1 in Incheon, South Korea. Today is really focused on our American context, but I don't like leaving the Korean campus out of this conversation. We have just under 40,000 students at George Mason, and we have a robust online student population, including in the pre-pandemic, what feels like 100 years ago, but was 4 years ago at this point, the pre-pandemic context. We have a very robust online population. So our library staff is about 120, 40 of whom are in faculty roles. You're going to hear me talking about library instructors primarily today, and you should just know that that refers to people working in both types of roles, staff and faculty. We have about 35 people providing library instruction at Mason through what you might think of as more traditional in-class information literacy, or through workshops, or both. And again, I call those library instructors today. So, as we were thinking through, so again, I'm still going through my preamble, right, to get us into talking about the actual institute, but some context for why we decided to start this thing. So As many of us who went to library school can attest, there is a lack of pedagogical preparation in library and information science programs. It's also well documented in the literature that our programs are not preparing us for our teaching reality. And it's primarily through on-the-job training that we cultivate this idea of ourselves as teachers and our skills and teaching styles. Additionally, library instructors at Mason are in faculty and staff roles, and some have their library degree and some do not. So some have not ever worked in a library before. Some have never been to library school. We've got a wide variety of people who are teaching classes at Mason. There's also people working on a variety of teams. So I work on the teaching and learning team. I'm the instruction coordinator. Our team, as you might imagine, has a lot of time to devote to teaching. We're really a teaching, learning, and outreach team. But then there's also subject teams like social sciences. There is a digital scholarship team that does like data, etc. There's a lot of different teams doing a lot of different types of instruction with a lot of different abilities to focus on it. And we have people at a variety of experience levels. Hopefully this is all feeling kind of familiar to people, that like we've got people who've never been in a classroom before, all the way up to people who've literally written books about how to use the ACRL framework, right? So we've got a pretty wide variety of people working at Mason, teaching in the classroom. At the time that we created the Library Teaching Institute, the only instruction training that we were aware of was an onboarding for new library instructors on the teaching and learning team. So if you were hired onto teaching and learning and you had never taught before, there was a shadowing, co-teaching sort of program for you. But if you had taught before, or if you were not on teaching and learning, the training program was not quite as standardized. So what we wanted to create with creating what eventually became the Library Teaching Institute was a robust training program for library instructors at the institution. We wanted to establish this baseline idea of what all library instructors at Mason need to know. So what do you need to know to be able to be comfortable and confident in the classroom? I've been teaching for like 10 or so years. So as you may know, that developing comfort takes a lot of time, and there are days where I feel like I have not gotten to that comfort level yet, right? It comes through experience. And what we wanted to do was find a way to sort of scaffold that experience so that people weren't having their first teaching experience in front of undergrads, for example. And we started this whole training thing by developing a list of core competencies. And what we're going to start with today is defining our own together. So the way I'm thinking about a core competency in this context is these are the essential skills, knowledge, and abilities that a person, a library instructor, needs in order to achieve a basic level of competence. What are the sort of base level things that a person needs to know to be able to go into a classroom? And I'm curious to hear from everybody here. I'm going to paste the link to this Padlet in the chat, and I'll also share my screen. But what are core competencies for library instructors at your institution? We're going to take a minute to like brainstorm and add our ideas, but hopefully that link works for people and brings you here. If you've never used a Padlet before, there's a little plus down here on the bottom right. Feel free to add your idea using that. You should be able to also upvote other people's ideas. So take a minute, add some ideas for what a core competency for library instruction would be at your institution. Fret not, I am also going to share what we came up with, but I'm looking forward to hearing what you all have to say. I hope that as you're typing, you're also taking a moment to recognize the really great ideas that we're seeing so far. Apologies, I'm not sure I knew that when we did a Padlet that it was going to reorganize everybody every 2 minutes. So hopefully everybody here's a fast reader. This link is going to stay live after the presentation as well. So if you're watching the recording, you can still participate. So some things that I'm seeing are things like communication skills, how to sound not, I love, somebody wrote how to not sound like a robot. How to not sound like a robot, like agreed, that's a core competency, right? Cultural competence, in universal and inclusive design, somebody wrote in the chat, understanding how to bomb and how to feel okay about it. Like, yeah, that's a really core competency, right? The ACRL framework, report, how to build rapport with students, what's scaffolding. I also like these people wrote subject area knowledge and competence in subject matter. Yeah, core competency is knowing what you're teaching, right? Humility, love, don't freak out. Yep. I can tell I'm in a room full of instruction people. I am loving what I'm seeing here. Yeah, assessment, making research steps relatable to students. Totally. These are all really great ideas. So please do keep adding ideas to this Padlet. I'm going to move on and talk about what we came up with as our core competencies. But yeah, feel free to keep adding as we go. Like I said, this link is going to stay live after the presentation, so you can keep adding. We can keep learning from each other. Ooh, before we go, not taking things that happen in the classroom personally. Perfect. We're going to talk more about that in just a second. Love that one. So, what we came up with at Mason was really similar to what I saw on the Padlet. I've got it broken down here into 4 categories. So, foundational knowledge. What's information literacy? Why is it important? Like, who teaches it? What skills does it include? How do you write a lesson plan? What's the ACRL framework? Why does it matter? That sort of thing. Something that's not up there is also learning theory was something that we added as a core competency, basics of learning theory. Applied knowledge, so how do you design and facilitate an activity? One of my co-planners called it, what do you do with your hands when you're in the classroom? And I think that's a perfect way to put it. How do you work with faculty? How do you negotiate for our role in the classroom? How do you conduct student learning assessment? In terms of attitudes and values, we really were focusing on comfort and confidence. So how do you not freak out when things go wrong? Was something that we really thought about a lot. And I'm also a big believer in reflective practice. I think it's really important. Again, my presentation isn't about reflective practice, nor is it about land acknowledgements. But if you want to talk about either, let's talk about it. Would love to pick your brain about that. We've obviously got a lot of expertise in the room. And then lastly, some logistical stuff like what instruction rooms are available, what technology is in those rooms, how do you use it, how do you turn the projector on, how do we use our instruction form to get instruction requests, that sort of thing. So this is where we started. This is where we thought like, okay, this is what people need to know. And yeah, andragogy, somebody wrote in the chat, is what I meant by learning theory, I think. I think I'm using that right. It's like behaviorism, cognitivism, and constructivism is what we talked about. It's maybe a little bit. So as we were developing the core competencies, we realized it wasn't just new library instructors that really needed this program. It was returning instructors too. Returning instructors needed support. For example, I started at Mason a few years back, and I didn't have a really in-depth knowledge of how to conduct formal student learning assessment. But I had been teaching for like 7 or 8 years by that point, and I had never really done it. So even though I had been teaching for that long and would be a returning instructor, I'm still pretty new to that topic, right? So we figured everybody could use some of what we were hoping to teach in those core competencies. So how do you develop a training program that meets the needs of completely brand new library instructors and library instructors who are returning to the classroom? We call them returning, maybe experienced would be a better term for that, but like, how do you develop a training program that meets these competing needs? Here's what we came up with. So the Library Teaching Institute, as we decided on it, was a workshop series held in the summer and held online. So this started in 2021. We were working fully remotely at that time, but we held it online regardless. with weekly live workshops that we recorded if people were not able to attend, so they could watch later. So we held it for 90 minutes every Wednesday morning for a while. People were able to attend to get a certificate, or they were able to attend sessions a la carte. I'll talk more about that on the next slide. And then crucially, we opened this training program to everyone at Mason Libraries. So new instructors, returning instructors, but also this third category of people who were interested or curious about or wanted to be a library instructor one day, but aren't currently a library instructor and don't currently have teaching as part of their responsibilities. So we figured we can open it to everyone, and anybody who's interested can come and learn a little bit about the classroom and see if it's for them, practice a little. So it's open to everybody at Mason Libraries, all 120 of my colleagues. The certificate that I mentioned was really designed for those new instructors, but it was designed for anyone. So the certificate commemorated a person's professional development. And if the library instructor happened to be a faculty member, they could also include it in their reappointment and promotion packet. We're like a version of term faculty at George Mason. So the certificate was, again, it was optional, but to get the certificate, our participants needed to attend the series of workshops or watch the recordings, and do a weekly homework assignment based on that workshop. So some examples would be like, we walked you through a bunch of different types of activities and why active learning matters. Can you design an activity for your own context? And then we can give you some feedback. Or in the session about building confidence, which we'll talk about in a minute, we talked a lot about developing a teaching toolkit, like a set of things you bring with you to the classroom to make you feel more confident, like a sweater, water, pens, etc. You know, Mason, like many places, we have diverse climate indoors. So you never know how cold or hot the room is going to be. Got to bring that librarian armor of a cardigan, right? So create your own teaching toolkit or reflect on the process as a whole. There were lots of different options for homework assignments. And I want to sort of maybe go back to this idea that participants could do all of this to get a certificate at the end. Or they could just attend one session if they wanted to. Or they could attend all 5 sessions, all 8 sessions, but not do the certificate. And they didn't have to like opt in or register for the certificate. They could just choose in the moment what made sense to them. So they could decide that they wanted to do the certificate, run out of time, and then there's no pressure to submit all your work so you can get an A in the Library Teaching Institute class. For the record, we didn't grade their stuff, but hopefully that makes sense that like basically they get invited to this series of workshops. They build on each other, but they're also able to be done as a one-off, just in case you're interested in attending a session about activities to get some new ideas. You don't have to do the whole certificate in order to do that. It takes some of the pressure off, and it also allows for people who have maybe more specific needs than wanting to learn everything. They can come and just meet those specific needs. So with that being said, let's talk about what sessions there were available. So in 2021, that's the first year we did this. We did the Teaching Institute as 2 separate series of 4 workshops, one about delivering a lesson and one about designing a lesson. So that first session was really for the true beginner. You've never been in the classroom before. Our main program learning outcome for delivering a lesson was that you could take a lesson plan somebody else wrote, go into the classroom, and deliver it confidently. So you're not really writing your own lesson plan. You're just getting into the classroom, not freaking out. You can use the technology and you can make it happen. So you can see the sessions up there. We had one about definitions and the policies about instruction, the anatomy of a lesson plan, some classroom management and facilitation skills, and then like a reflecting, practicing, capping session. Then the designing a lesson series, which was more for our intermediate audience, was really hyper-focused on like, how do you design an effective lesson plan? So you're not taking somebody else's, you're designing your own. So in this one is where we did like learning theory. We talked about writing learning outcomes, designing activities, and conducting student learning assessment. So this was our first pass at the Library Teaching Institute, was these 2 sessions that were held, I almost just said back to back. They were held like at 2 different parts of our summer. Spoiler alert, we're going to talk about why that didn't work in just a second. So What we found in doing it the first time is that the delivering a lesson series, that first one for the true beginner, was much more popular than designing a lesson. So I've got the numbers here on the screen, but delivering had like up to 12, maybe even up to 15 participants per session, with 3 people getting the certificate at the end. And then designing a lesson had fewer participants and nobody did the certificate at the end. What we found after talking to people was this was due to a variety of different reasons. One, the division between the two was kind of confusing. In fact, when I was preparing for this presentation, I was like, why did we divide these in the first place? And also, why did we name them such similar names? So the division was a little bit confusing. People didn't quite know which session was for them, which session was not for them. And it was really challenging to find 8 weeks in the summer where we were able to deliver workshops. Additionally, something I could not anticipate is that we did the designing a lesson series right as we were coming back to work in person. So there was a lot going on at that time that resulted in us wanting to kind of rethink the way that the program flowed and make a little bit more sense for our participants, make it a little easier. Here's what we changed. So in 2022, again, the second year that we did this, we integrated the 2 series together into a 5 workshop sequence. So rather than the 8 workshops that were kind of built on each other, and I'm doing this because this sort of represents what my calendar looked like at that time, the 2 series got combined, and we combined elements of both. This did necessitate us streamlining and taking out some content or shortening some content, but that's what we did. So the 5 workshops that we did last year were a first session that covered defining information literacy and the ACRL framework, learning theory, and also introducing the program and the certificate. A session about building confidence, which included things like how do you manage a classroom? How do you prepare for going into the classroom? How do you facilitate in a way that feels authentic to you, but is also effective? That's all sort of in that building confidence theme. There's also a little bit in that theme about how to work with faculty, I should say teaching faculty. So how do you partner with professors? Session 3 was all about learning outcomes, and then all about activities, both designing and leading them, and then one about student learning assessment. So these 5 workshops, again, they combined elements of both. If I go back, can I go back? TBD. You can sort of see, I think, the places where we may have streamlined. For example, learning theory was its own session, and what we ended up doing was combining it into the introductory session and giving it a little less time. So this worked a lot better. We had, I believe it was 15 participants in every session, including we even had one session with 20. And then we also ended up with 5 certificates at the end. So it went a little bit better in 2022 than it did in 2021, largely due to the streamlining of the process and also shortening the time commitment. I'll mention these 5 workshops were still held every week at the same time, still 90 minutes long each. We still did homework every week. It's just fewer sessions focused on these things. For 2023, we're kind of gearing up our planning for the coming year of this program. So we're going to be doing this in July and August. So starting like mid-July after Independence Day, and then moving into the first week of August, I believe. And we're going to primarily follow the structure we did in 2022. So that sort of 5 workshop sequence, but we are making a couple of key changes. One is that we're adding, instead of in the first session, so in this first session, we spent some time introducing the certificate, but then if you recall at the beginning, I mentioned the certificate is optional, and not everybody who's in every session is going to do the certificate. So why would we cover it in the session if we could just add an asynchronous introduction to the certificate to our Blackboard page? So that's what we're doing. We're going to record a video overviewing the expectations. We're also, for the first time, going to host an in-person session where people will be able to practice some of the skills we're talking about. Again, we started this kind of during the peak of COVID. We're still in COVID, obviously, but it's a very different environment now than it was. So we're hoping to do an in-person session in one of our instruction rooms where people can get in there and practice, sort of like a speed dating lightning talk activity with an activity. I just said activity twice. Nobody judge me. And then the last thing we're adding is a larger emphasis on applications outside of a traditional information literacy context. So this program is open to anyone at Mason libraries, including many people who do not have instruction as part of their job duties. It's roughly a quarter of our employees that actually do library instruction or workshops. And we want to make sure it's applicable to everyone. So we're starting to think about what it could mean to, for example, you can take what you learned about writing an effective learning outcome and use it to write effective meeting agendas. You can take what you learned about how to lead an activity effectively and use it in training your student workers, or you can do student learning assessment with your student staff with training. So that's what we're sort of starting to think about, is like meetings, training. How can we apply our library instruction and teaching skill sets outside of that teaching context? I don't know about all of you who, I'm assuming most people here do a lot of teaching. I find that my teaching skills help me outside of a teaching context often. So yeah, basically that's what I'm trying to say here, is that we're adding in this asynchronous introduction. We're changing a few things around, but in general, we're going to follow the same sort of series of sessions that we followed before. Really hyper-focused on like the basic level of competence that a library instructor needs to be successful in the classroom. Before we go into our last activity, I'm also going to mention that there are lots of things that we don't cover in the Library Teaching Institute. For example, we do cover backwards design. We don't go too far in depth on it. We do cover universal design for learning. We don't go too far in depth on it, right? But we do have a community of practice that we lead throughout the course of the rest of the year, which does cover some more topics. For example, anti-racist information literacy, feminist pedagogy, andragogy. These are sorts of topics that we cover throughout the rest of the year to build off of what we do during LTI. So LTI is really that 101 level, and then we build and do more advanced topics after that, if that makes sense. So as we move into the kind of Q&A in our last activity, we're doing pretty good on time, so we may have a chance to also have a little bit of a discussion. I'm curious for you to think about what it might take to bring the Library Teaching Institute or something similar to your context, and what's a step you can take to start a conversation surrounding library instructor training at your institution. So I'm going to paste a link to the chat. I'm going to paste a link into the chat. It is not a link to the chat. And it should bring you here, which is a Padlet that is going to be just as chaotic as the one we did earlier. My apologies. And if you missed that first Padlet, you can click this little yellow plus down in the bottom right to add your thoughts, upvote others. And we have enough time to do a little bit of a discussion about people's ideas as we go. So now I'm going to practice one of the facilitation skills I teach in the Library Teaching Institute, and I'm going to be quiet, count backwards in my head. Thank you to the person who asked me via DM what I'm looking for to contribute. This is a space for you to brainstorm either your first step that you could take to start a conversation about library instructor training, or what you might need to implement this or a similar program at your institution. Just sort of to start a conversation about what it could mean to bring it to your own context. I'm seeing a lot of great ideas and a lot of common themes. A lot of people talking about size of staff. Working in partnership with other colleges in the area could make sense, for sure. Start small. It's good advice. We, as we were starting this, we surveyed our staff to see if this would be of interest, which is something I left out of my slides for some reason. So we actually, in the creation of our core competencies, we surveyed library instructors and other staff at Mason to see what they would be interested in learning more about. And just to gauge whether people would be interested, because you wouldn't want to create this whole thing without knowing people would be interested. Institute together, love that. I like that somebody's thinking about onboarding too, loving that. It's actually become part of some onboarding checklists at my institution for some people's departments, which I think is really cool. Like I get emails about it, like when is it going to be held? I want to make sure our new librarians are able to attend, which is good given that we're only in our 3rd year. I guess only might be overselling it. I also very much appreciate somebody talking about compensating involvement. So please keep adding thoughts to this Padlet as we go. This is some really great ideas, some really great discussion. I'm loving the kind of community orientation of a lot of the feedback that we're getting. That's something that we're trying to cultivate, is this community. Because, teaching can feel very solitary, but there are many, many ways to make it more collaborative. So let me bring my slides back and say thank you to all of you for attending. Thank you for your thoughts so far. And I'm wondering if people have any questions. Also, if you don't have any questions now, you're always welcome to email me. My slides are available at that link that I'll put in the chat. Yeah, I found that. So,
I'm sorry. No, I was just going to say, David, we've definitely got some more time. So if people are still, formulating questions or comments, please go ahead and keep adding those. And then the wrap up session will be right here in the same space. So we can just take our time here. Sorry, David, go right ahead.
Oh no, please. I was going to say, somebody wrote in the chat that this sounds like a good opportunity, but it was offered by like a teaching center on campus, and we took some inspiration from that. And there's a pedagogy course at my institution for English composition graduate teaching assistants that we took some inspiration from as well. I'm embedded in that course. Yeah, Jesse, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, that was my comment. I was just going to say this. I really appreciate this model just because so often when I've gone to these from the, we call it a Center for Pedagogical Innovation, they don't have to deal with the one-shots, and also the fact that usually librarians are integrating as part of a larger course. So this just sounds fantastic to focus on library-specific instruction.
Yeah, like there are some concerns that we share with people who are teaching more traditional semester-long courses, and some that are totally unique to our context. So yeah, thank you for that, Jesse. We've got questions in the chat. So one is, do you have links to examples of these things that we've created? I do have links, and I'd be happy to share them. Just shoot me an email and we can talk more about like any sort of materials that I've created. I and the team. What were my biggest challenges and roadblocks in putting this program together? What an excellent question. Here are some of my biggest challenges. One, starting as the face-to-face instruction coordinator 6 weeks before we all went online for a year and a half from the pandemic. So needing to pivot all of our instruction online was a big challenge. Another, I would say, was staff time, workload time and potential burnout to be able to focus on teaching. Somebody wrote a really astute comment on the Padlet about enthusiasm. and energy surrounding the program. We didn't face an energy barrier as much as we faced a prioritization barrier sometimes from people who were not on teaching-oriented teams. So that involved me talking with our team leads and associate university librarian to just talk about like whether we could make it a priority for those to participate. And it also helped us with our part-time people to be able to prioritize coming to it. We did do, so somebody asked in the chat, did you do any pre or post surveys for the participants? What kind of feedback did you get to redesign it? Yes, we did do we did post surveys, not pre-surveys. Most of our student learning assessment from the actual institute came in the form of rubrics for the materials that people created as part of the homework. And then in 2022, we also did some student learning assessment of the activities we did during the session itself, the way we would in a traditional library instruction session. The post surveys were more for evaluation purposes, and feedback we got included things like, can you record the sessions? How can we, and we got some feedback about how to create a community afterwards, after the institute happened. So we created a channel on our Slack. We may even create a Teams site at some point. Once I can convince myself to understand how Microsoft Teams works, we might make that happen this year. Other feedback was that the two different series were confusing. So that was how we thought about streamlining the process for the next time. What other questions or thoughts or ideas do people have about this program? I will also give you a shameless plug that if this sounded like a lot of work to create and you might want to talk to me about how to make it happen at your institution with our format, send me an email. Let's talk about it. We already did a lot of work for this, so happy to share the wealth.